Sir.
Thank you. My name is James Vita. I'm here representing the National Lawyers Guild of Rhode Island. I'm speaking in opposition to this bill, and I ask the committee to reject it. Many of the concerns that we would raise have already been addressed by the ACLU, by Mr. Gallipo, and by other organizations, so I won't belabor the issue. But certainly the ambiguity in the drafting of this bill, the fact that it is very broad, the fact that it would apply to a large number of factual scenarios and situations, not just to so-called traffickers, gives the National Lawyers Guild a great deal of concern over the reach of this bill. Looking beyond the legal framework, we think that the bill itself simply is a poor attempt, a poor answer and a poor solution to what is a public health crisis. And it fails to take into account the lessons of the past decades of the war on drugs. The fact that incarceration, more and more incarceration, has not worked to reduce drug use, has not worked to reduce the supply and demand in drug markets, has not worked to address any of these problems. It has only worked to starve and strangle our communities of services that would actually be beneficial and would actually go to help address more concerns, address these issues. Services like public housing, services like greater access to healthcare, to affordable healthcare, greater access to mental health treatment, greater access to substance use disorder treatment. Further incarceration is not going to be the solution to what, as I said, is a public health crisis. Speaking personally, I am a public defender in the state of Massachusetts. I work and represent indigent folks charged with crimes every day. I work with what I expect would be a great many people whose conduct would fall within the scope of this proposed legislation if they were in Rhode Island. And I want to echo Mr. Gallipo's testimony that there is a very there are not clear lines on the street level regarding who is a user, who is a distributor, who is a seller. People cross those roles and change those roles very frequently. It's a very fluid situation, and this bill would, I think, would certainly reach many people who I expect the committee does not think would actually be affected and could actually potentially be prosecuted and face a life sentence under this legislation. I also want to speak to the point that I believe was raised in the Attorney General's testimony, that we can perhaps rely on the discretion of prosecutors to perhaps only use this bill or only bring charges in circumstances where it is appropriate. And I think that one of the lessons of the drug war is that if there are laws that can be used to prosecute people, they will be used to prosecute people, and prosecutors will charge people with as many offenses and as many crimes as they can, and see which ones will remain and which ones will not. And the potential penalty of a life sentence, especially a mandatory life sentence, will be used as a hammer to coerce cooperation and coerce pleas from people who are I don't think fall under anyone's definition of a trafficker. So what Rhode Island is facing, what the United States is facing, is a public health crisis, and this legislature should be looking at other solutions rather than incarceration, solutions such as safe consumption sites, solutions such as decriminalization. Our courts are poorly designed to address these public health crises, and we should not be looking at further incarceration. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Any questions? Yes, Vice Chair Jello.
Hi there, James. Just one quick question.
Yes.
We heard earlier that 40-some states have similar laws on the books. Does Massachusetts have such a law?
I am not aware of Massachusetts having such a law. I believe that they attempt to charge folks under the manslaughter provisions or under a reckless disregard theory of homicide.
And the penalty would be substantially less than life in prison?
So for instance, in Massachusetts, a second degree murder conviction carries a sentence of 15 years to life in prison.
Thank you.
Representative Price.
Thank you, Chairman. When you comment about drug traffickers, from what I understand, the federal government has declared the opioid crisis a public health emergency in 2017. They have called for stricter penalties for drug traffickers. So it sounds like this bill isn't really a trafficking bill, but as far as drug traffickers, in your words, you said that you didn't think they would fall into drug traffickers. At what level do you think that the drug trafficking should be addressed, if that makes sense?
I think if I can answer your question, I would. I think Mr. Gallup put it really quite well, which is that the level at which the decisions about the supply chain and where the decisions about where to manufacture and to put in or to distribute fentanyl deliberately are being made at much higher levels up the supply chain than individuals distributing or sharing or narcotics in Rhode Island at the street level. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I believe so. So this, it's almost like this bill could address a higher level of the chain of distribution of the drugs, rather than at the end user, at the maybe more of the production level or the introduction level into the country, that level.
What I suppose, although what I'll say based on my experience as a public defender is that I represent folks charged with felony level drug distribution charges, and none of them, I would say, based on my experience, are making the conscious decision to include or traffic in fentanyl deliberately. By the time it reaches them, by the time whatever they're distributing reaches them, it already contains fentanyl or other synthetic opioids. So whether this bill could address trafficking sort of at a international or a supranational level, I think is possible, but I want to emphasize that I'm here to address how it will affect, I think, most people who could potentially come into contact with this legislation or be charged under this legislation.
Thanks. One more question, Chair. So you're saying distribution and trafficking. There's a distinction between those two levels of the drug transition? Is there?
So I think that people speak sort of casually about drug traffickers, right? And that's sort of the I think what people imagine are the individuals making decisions about who bring narcotics or other substances into the United States and deal at sort of the level somebody else addressed, like flying them in with their planes or what have you. For instance, in Massachusetts, somebody can be charged as a drug trafficker with less than an ounce of a controlled substance. So I tend to speak of, and so I find, based on my experience, that there are individuals who deal in an amount of narcotics that would be considered trafficking under a criminal definition in Massachusetts, who are not what I think what the public casually calls drug traffickers. So I want to, what I want to address and what I was hoping to address was that what we often think of as, the people we often think of as drug traffickers are, and who could be charged as drug traffickers are two different things. And people, and individuals who are selling, distributing, using, sharing at a street level are often subject to drug trafficking laws, could be considered drug traffickers, but who really are not the sorts of individuals that are involved in international drug trafficking, as we colloquially, I think of that.
Okay, thank you.